In 2 or 3 days' time the robbers had purchased the mules and jars, and as the mouths of the jars were rather too narrow for his purpose, the captain caused them to be widened, and after having put one of his men into each, with the weapons which he thought fit, leaving open the seam which had been undone to leave them room to breathe, he rubbed the jars on the outside with oil from the full vessel. Things being thus prepared, when the 19 mules were loaded with 37 robbers and jars, and the jar of oil, the captain, as their driver, set out with them, and reached the town by the dusk of the evening, as he had intended. He led them through the streets till he came to Ali Baba's, at whose door he designed to have knocked, but was prevented by his sitting there after supper to take a little fresh air. He stopped his mules, addressed himself to him, and said, "I have brought some oil a great way to sell at tomorrow's market, and it is now so late that I do not know where to lodge. If I should not be troublesome to you, do me the favour to let me pass the night with you, and I shall be very much obliged by your hospitality." Though Ali Baba had seen the captain of the robbers in the forest, and had heard him speak, it was impossible to know him in the disguise of an oil merchant. He told him he should be welcome, and immediately opened his gates for the mules to go into the yard. At the same time he called to a slave, and ordered him, when the mules were unloaded, to put them into the stable and to feed them, and then went to Morgiana to bid her get a good supper for his guest. After they had finished supper, Ali Baba, charging Morgiana afresh to take care of his guest, said to her, "Tomorrow morning I design to go to the bath before day. Take care my bathing linen be ready. Give them to Abdallah," which was the slave's name, "and make me some good broth against my return." After this he went to bed. In the meantime the captain of the robbers went into the yard, and took off the lid of each jar, and gave his people orders what to do. Beginning at the first jar, and so on to the last, he said to each man, "As soon as I throw some stones out of the chamber window where I lie, do not fail to come out, and I will immediately join you." After this he returned into the house, when Morgiana, taking up a light, conducted him to his chamber, where she left him; and he, to avoid any suspicion, put the light out soon after, and laid himself down in his clothes, that he might be the more ready to rise. Morgiana, remembering Ali Baba's orders, got his bathing linen ready, and ordered Abdallah to set on the pot for the broth. But while she was preparing it, the lamp went out, and there was no more oil in the house, nor any candles. What to do she did not know, for the broth must be made. Abdallah, seeing her very uneasy, said, "Do not fret and tease yourself, but go into the yard and take some oil out of one of the jars." Morgiana thanked Abdallah for his advice, took the oil pot, and went into the yard, when, as she came nigh the first jar, the robber within said softly, "Is it time?" Though naturally much surprised at finding a man in the jar instead of the oil she wanted, she immediately felt the importance of keeping silence, as Ali Baba, his family, and herself were in great danger, and collecting herself, without showing the least emotion, she answered, "Not yet, but presently." She went quietly in this manner to all the jars, giving the same answer till she came to the jar of oil. By this means Morgiana found that her master Ali Baba had admitted 38 robbers into his house, and that this pretended oil merchant was their captain. She made what haste she could to fill her oil pot, and returned to her kitchen, where, as soon as she had lighted her lamp, she took a great kettle, and went again to the oil jar, filled the kettle, set it on a large wood fire, and as soon as it boiled, went and poured enough into every jar to stifle and destroy the robber within. When this action, worthy of the courage of Morgiana, was executed without any noise, as she had projected, she returned into the kitchen with an empty kettle, and having put out the great fire she had made to boil the oil, and leaving just enough to make the broth, put out the lamp also, and remained silent, resolving not to go to rest till she had observed what might follow through a window of the kitchen, which opened into the yard. She had not waited long before the captain of the robbers got up, opened the window, and finding no light, and hearing no noise, or any one stirring in the house, gave the appointed signal by throwing little stones, several of which hit the jars, as he doubted not by the sound they gave. He then listened, but not hearing or perceiving anything whereby he could judge that his companions stirred, he began to grow very uneasy, threw stones again a second and also a third time, and could not comprehend the reason that none of them should answer his signal. Much alarmed, he went softly down into the yard, and going to the first jar, while asking the robber, whom he thought alive, if he was in readiness, smelt the hot boiled oil, which sent forth a steam out of the jar. Hence he suspected that his plot to murder Ali Baba and plunder his house was discovered. Examining all the jars one after another, he found that all his gang were dead, and enraged to despair at having failed in his design, he forced the lock of a door that led from the yard to the garden, and climbing over the walls made his escape. When Morgiana saw him depart, she went to bed, satisfied and pleased to have succeeded so well in saving her master and family. Ali Baba rose before day, and followed by his slave went to the baths, entirely ignorant of the important event which had happened at home. When he returned from the baths, he was very much surprised to see the oil jars, and that the merchant was not gone with the mules. He asked Morgiana, who opened the door, the reason of it. "My good master," answered she, "God preserve you and all your family. You will be better informed of what you wish to know when you have seen what I have to show you, if you will follow me." As soon as Morgiana had shut the door, Ali Baba followed her, when she requested him to look into the first jar and see if there was any oil. Ali Baba did so, and seeing a man, started back in alarm, and cried out. "Do not be afraid," said Morgiana. "The man you see there can neither do you nor anybody else any harm. He is dead."
"Oh, Morgiana," said Ali Baba, "what is it you show me? Explain yourself."
"I will," replied Morgiana. "Moderate your astonishment, and do not excite the curiosity of your neighbours, for it is of great importance to keep this affair secret. Look into all the other jars." Ali Baba examined all the other jars one after another, and when he came to that which had the oil in it, found it prodigiously sunk, and stood for some time motionless, sometimes looking at the jars, and sometimes at Morgiana, without saying a word, so great was his surprise. At last, when he had recovered himself, he said, "And what is become of the merchant?" "Merchant," answered she, "he is as much a one as I am. I will tell you who he is, and what is become of him, but you had better hear the story in your own chamber, for it is time for your health that you had your broth after your bathing." Morgiana then told him all she had done, from the first observing the mark upon the house to the destruction of the robbers and the flight of their captain. On hearing of these brave deeds from the lips of Morgiana, Ali Baba said to her,
"God, by your means, has delivered me from the snares these robbers laid for my destruction. I owe therefore my life to you, and for the first token of my acknowledgment, give you your liberty from this moment, till I can complete your recompense as I intend."
Ali Baba's garden was very long and shaded at the further end by a great number of large trees. Near these he and the slave Abdallah dug a trench long and wide enough to hold the bodies of the robbers, and as the earth was light, they were not long in doing it. When this was done, Ali Baba hid the jars and weapons, and as he had no occasion for the mules, he sent them at different times to be sold in the market by his slave. While Ali Baba took these measures, the captain of the 40 robbers returned to the forest with inconceivable mortification. He did not stay long. The loneliness of the gloomy cavern became frightful to him. He determined, however, to avenge the fate of his companions, and to accomplish the death of Ali Baba. For this purpose he returned to the town, and took a lodging in a khan, and disguised himself as a merchant in silks. Under this assumed character, he gradually conveyed a great many sorts of rich stuffs and fine linen to his lodging from the cavern, but with all the necessary precautions to conceal the place whence he brought them. In order to dispose of the merchandise, when he had thus amassed them together, he took a warehouse, which happened to be opposite to Cassim's, which Ali Baba's son had occupied since the death of his uncle. He took the name of Cogia Houssain, and, as a newcomer, was, according to custom, extremely civil and complaisant to all the merchants, his neighbours. Ali Baba's son was, from his vicinity, one of the first to converse with Cogia Houssain, who strove to cultivate his friendship more particularly. 2 or 3 days after he was settled, Ali Baba came to see his son, and the captain of the robbers recognised him at once, and soon learned from his son who he was. After this he increased his assiduities, caressed him in the most engaging manner, made him some small presents, and often asked him to dine and sup with him, when he treated him